logic and rational thought are probably some of the terms or phrases that I speak about most in these videos. And I've said before, logic is in some ways my religion. That's what I look to drive how I function and how I think. So I thought it important to define that a little bit more. I've talked about this in other videos, but what do I mean by logic and how it kind of all ties together? And specifically, what I'm starting to realize is that there's two forms of logic that I speak of, which maybe isn't great. Maybe I need to think of some different terms for that. But there ends up being, in effect, like a big L logic and a little l logic. And what I mean by that is the big L logic, it comes back to this idea that logic itself is a universal principle, I believe. I believe everything that happens in the world, whether it be actions that we take as humans or just things that happen beyond that, they all happen for a reason. They all happen because they are meant to happen. They lead to some end result that's trying to be achieved. You can think of it as a plant that moves towards the sun. It wants to grow. It needs the sun to do that. So it shifts and moves towards it. It's not irrational. It's not illogical. It would never move away from the sun if the sun is what it needed. And much like that with people, we are always doing some calculation or cost-benefit analysis in our minds, and we act in accordance with that. Whether right, wrong, or indifferent, whatever that calculation spits out, we follow that, and that's the logic. Big L logic would say, okay, that all holds true for humans, but big L logic means we do that calculation effectively. We live up to the things we talk about in these videos, right? We think better, we question, we're super aware, we understand our blind spots and our biases, we take in as much information and inputs as we can, and we weight them appropriately. So whether that be emotion, whether that be identity issues, whether that be just raw information and facts and data about the topic, we bring all that in, and to the best we can, we act objectively to do that calculation and try and get to an answer. That would be your big L logic. Your little l logic would mean you don't do those things, right? So there's still a calculation being run. We're still trying to get to an answer, and we act in accordance with that, but we don't do all the math behind it the right way. We don't take in all the inputs. We don't weight them effectively. We overvalue certain things like emotion or fear and things like that. So again, we still do run a calculation, and we still do absolutely act in accordance with what that calculation tells us, but it's just not that sophisticated of math and thinking that goes into it. So you have your big L logic and your little l logic at play. I mention that, and I think it's relevant because the current book that I'm reading is Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. And he takes a very kind of behavioral economics view of how the mind works and how we think, which is pretty common. I've read a number of books like that. I think it makes a lot of sense. It ties in a lot of ways to the things I was just talking about, of calculations that are run, and it does it in a very pure way, right? Very much as an economist would, to say when you're thinking about or trying to assess how people think or function, you can really break it down truly to math, and you calculate it, and there's almost an objectively right answer and what would be defined as logical or rational, and anything that breaks from that is illogical or irrational. An example given in the book, in the chapter that I'm reading currently, is around the price of things that we're willing to pay for, and how, in his terms, the author's terms, we tend to act irrationally when something is free to us. So simple example, as he explains it, if there's something you're looking to buy, let's call it a pen, and the price drops from $20 of that pen to $10, so a $10 price drop, X percentage of people, let's call it 50% more people would be likely to buy that pen because it dropped in price by $10. But when it drops in price from $10 to $0, it becomes free. It's the same $10 drop in value, but 90% of people would now look to get that pen and take that free pen. And I'm oversimplifying and probably not doing it justice, but you get the idea. His idea would be that, hey, that's the same drop in value. It's $10 in both cases, but more people are taking it now because it's free. And there's other examples like this that lay that out, where you can actually look at the math and say the value change doesn't dictate that people should act differently, but they do, right? Whether it be because it's free, whether it be because of the way it was presented to them, there's something there. And again, he would say, when you do that, when you act differently, even though the values are the same, you're acting irrationally. And it is somewhat semantics, right? Where, you know, irrational versus little L logic, does it really matter what we call it? And I think it does, right? I think it does matter because in the world of the behavior economist, or behavioral economist, there's a risk. There's a risk to looking at those scenarios and saying there is rational, which means you act in accordance with the math of the economic calculation that's being done, and anything that sways from that is irrational. And it's easy to dismiss those things and say, well, that's just people, human nature, and it's whether it be irrational thought, whether it be ignorance, whether it be being naive, any host of things. It's easy to dismiss that and say, well, it's important to diagnose it and understand it, which he does in the book, and it's very interesting, but without really understanding why, right? Without really understanding what's behind that. And I think looking at it through the lens to say that there's always a logic there. It's always rational when people are taking that pen, even though the value change is the same, right? But more people are getting it now. It's too easy, it's too simple, and it's too unproductive to just say, well, that's irrational. People act irrational when things are free. No. They're acting rationally. We just need to dig further and understand that next level why of what's driving that. There's something more to this equation that we're not accounting for. Now, again, it doesn't mean that it's right. It might be little L logic, where it's not the best logic they can employ, but there is some logic there. And to truly understand how people think and function and kind of predict future behavior, I think you need to continue digging into those deeper levels and not just dismissing it as illogical or irrational if it doesn't tie to the strict economic view of it.